President Trump posted an AI-generated video on social media overnight that's sparking a lot of controversy. It shows a reimagined Gaza Strip full of the glitz and glamour you might expect from a real estate developer like Trump, with a well-known penchant for flair. Joining me to discuss this and more, Niall Stanage, White House columnist here at The Hill. Now, I guess Trump is trolling the world here with that type of video, but back in reality, the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is set to expire this weekend. Negotiations to reach a permanent end to the war have gone nowhere. Israel says it's ready to begin intense fighting again. Surely will result in more death and destruction. Is the Trump administration doing anything to prevent this war from restarting?
Not an enormous amount, to be perfectly honest. I mean, that video that you showed, I think, was a kind of fantasy land. You mentioned the real estate kind of vibe to it. Really very, very detached from the reality in Gaza, or anything that will be the reality in Gaza anytime soon. But the bigger part is that it sort of fuels fears about a US takeover and effective, what would be a colonization of Gaza, really. So I think in that sense, it obviously underlines Palestinian insecurities and probably does make peace a little harder to achieve.
And there's been an eruption of anger on social media over the post, including from some Trump supporters. Wondering if we're hearing anything from our U.S. Arab allies in the Middle East. It strikes me that this could create some problems for them back home, make the difficult between the U.S. and Arab allies in the Middle East more difficult. It's something that's very important for national security needs, and also if there is ever going to be any positive solution moving forward in Gaza itself.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. It was only relatively recently that the King of Jordan was here in Washington, and his attempt to sort of provide a kind of friendly atmosphere to Trump went only so far. After that meeting, he had to clarify that his government's position and what he called the unified Arab position was certainly not supportive of any US resettlement or redevelopment of Gaza.
Let's come back home and talk about this dramatic developments that happened last night on Capitol Hill. The Republican-led House passed this multi-trillion-dollar budget resolution last night. At one point, leadership pulled the bill off the floor, only to put it back on moments later. In the end, only one Republican voted against it. It's a big accomplishment for House Speaker Mike Johnson. Several Republicans have been saying throughout the day that they were not going to vote for it, either because it cut too much or didn't cut enough. How did Johnson corral his conference, and how important was President Trump?
So I think that the latter part of your question is very important there, because President Trump does appear to have had quite a central role in all of this. That handful of holdouts that you mentioned, several of them received calls, if not all of them, from the president whenever we were at the absolutely crunch moment in this vote, and obviously 3 of them he was able to win over. Now, we don't know exactly what Trump promised them, nor do we know whether Speaker Johnson will be able to deliver on those promises, but the point was, for now, it got this budget resolution over the line.
Still, though, a long road ahead, and significantly, Republicans need to fill in the details, how they're going to cut trillions of dollars in spending and merge Senate and House versions of the legislation. Do you see the vote last night as a sign that the GOP is united and that President Trump's pressure will work moving forward, or is this kind of a mirage because really the politically difficult moves have yet to come?
So it was a win for Speaker Johnson and the GOP, and I don't want to take too much away from that. But the point that you make is a very important one. Because look, if you argue for government cuts, you can make that argument in an abstract sense. Oh, the government's too large, there's too much waste, let's cut it away. That's all well and good until you're cutting something that voters themselves benefit from. Then the politics of it tend to flip very, very fast, and government cuts become obviously less popular if you're taking services or benefits away from people.
And part of the selling point, you heard Steve Scalise say this, is Medicaid's not even in this bill. Medicaid's not even in this bill. Well, they're going to have to find cuts, and I imagine Medicaid will be in the next bill. As for Democrats, they voted in unison against the bill. They say they're going to continue fighting. Let's take a listen to House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries.
They will not get a single Democratic vote. Why? Because we're voting with the American people. We will push back against the reckless Republican budget until it's buried deep in the ground, never to rise again.
You know, Democrats don't have a lot to go with here because they are out of power, but James Carville, the famed Democratic strategist, has been saying that Democrats should play possum and let Republicans self-destruct. Is Republicans slashing Medicaid benefits an example of that?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I think anything that slashes an important benefit to people can be obviously something that elicits political blowback. Carville's point, I think, is that he believes the Republican agenda is so radical, as he would see it, that it will not retain any significant degree of popularity and will in fact undercut the popularity of both the GOP and President Trump. So his argument is, well, Democrats can just stay united. Yes, it's frustrating for them if they cannot block these measures, but that's the math right now. That obviously could change when we have the next midterms.
Yeah, it's interesting because there was this new poll that came out that shows 71% of Trump voters oppose Medicaid cuts. Trump has said, even repeated today, that he's against Medicaid cuts. And the senators, Republicans over in the Senate, are more hesitant on Medicaid cuts. Is there a chance that those Medicaid cuts get watered down? And then what does that do to the overall efforts to cut government spending that has won over some of the more hardline conservatives?
I think when there's ever any suggestion of cutting back on services, then there's always the chance that the politicians step away from the cuts at the last moment because of what we've been talking about, the unpopularity of doing that. Now, to your other point, I mean, Medicaid costs a vast sum of money. And so if you're really wanting to cut government to the extent to which, say, Elon Musk is talking about, you are almost certainly going to have to slash that program. So you have two competing impulses. One, the desire to cut government significantly. The other, the fact that cuts to something like Medicaid tend to be very unpopular.
I want to talk about what's happening between the U.S. and Ukraine. Apparently, there's been reports that the two countries have come to an agreement over this mineral rights deal. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to visit the White House this Friday. Here is President Trump talking about that.
President Zelensky is going to be coming on Friday. That's now confirmed, and we're going to be signing an agreement, which will be a very big agreement, and that'll be on rare earth and other things.
You know, it was actually the Ukrainians that brought up the possibility of having this mineral deal last fall. The country was pitching this victory plan to President Trump. The initial offer from Trump was too much, according to the Ukrainians. What do we know about the deal that apparently has been reached now?
So we don't know an enormous amount about the specifics, and I think what we really will be looking to find out is how firm and unequivocal is the American guarantee of continued support for Ukraine in exchange for these mineral rights. There has been really a lot of vagueness around that topic. Obviously, the Ukrainians don't want to give up the mineral rights if they're not going to get that backing. So the assumption is there's some level of support. On the other hand, President Trump, having described Zelensky as a dictator and suggested that Ukraine is responsible for starting the war, that's a pretty significant break from standard position.
My big question is, what does the U.S. have to offer? Already said they don't want to put Trump doesn't want to put troops on the ground. NATO membership off the table.
Right.
Trying to find here what actually the U.S. may have to offer, but we'll leave it at that. Niall Stanage, White House columnist, thanks so much for your help.
Good to see you.
Today on Capitol Hill, lawmakers facing off at a House hearing focusing on the future of U.S. foreign aid. Plenty of fireworks at the hearing by the subcommittee on delivering on government efficiency, both inside and outside, where arrests were made at a nearby protest. NewsNation's Joe Khalil has the latest.
Yeah, Drew, this is the second meeting now of the DOGE House Subcommittee. The focus this time around is on cuts to foreign aid. And obviously that was the biggest flashpoint when DOGE really came in and first decided to scale back funding for USAID. It was those funding freezes that sparked a whole lot of backlash and protests and really strong objections from mostly Democratic lawmakers. So today, what we're hearing from the Republican side of the aisle, chaired by Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, are all of the specific ways that they feel U.S. aid that has gone overseas has been wasteful, has been fraudulent in some cases. And Chairwoman Greene went on to list a series of specific items that American taxpayer dollars were spent on that, as she lists them out, clearly sound like these wouldn't have been things that most taxpayers would have preferred their dollars go to. Take a listen.
They should be the ones who decide where their money goes. They can choose if they want to donate to a charity, a school, a church, or a nonprofit. They can choose if they want to privately donate to a transgender salon in Mumbai. They can choose if they want to privately donate to the British Broadcasting Corporation. They can choose if they want to privately donate to the Wuhan Institute of Virology through EcoHealth Alliance.
Now, of course, Democrats countered those things, saying that, of course, in a $40 billion budget for USAID, there is going to be waste. There are going to be things that our tax dollars maybe should be diverted to or, not spent on. But they say the overall goal of USAID and of foreign aid money generally is to advance America's national interests. And they say that is still an important goal. They say that Elon Musk and DOGE cutting that back is dangerous for our national security. And Congresswoman Melanie Stansberry, who's the top Democrat on this committee, made that point today, and she says the reason that we spend this money is to avoid conflict and to advance America's goodwill globally.
These investments are a fraction of the cost of weapons and defense, and the U.S. in the process is able to help promote national security, stop global pandemics, prevent hunger and mass migrations, and make the world and the United States a safer place.
And outside the committee itself, we know that a lot of USAID funding had been frozen. Secretary of State Rubio says that there are exemptions where if certain programs are working or in the national interest, that they can go back and sort of unfreeze those portions. But so far, there have been a lot of pushback from Democrats who say that is not happening nearly at the pace that they want to see it happen. Drew.
NewsNation's Joe Khalil, thank you. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is taking aim at childhood psychiatric drugs, making claims that medications are addictive. Those medications, like Adderall or SSRIs, help treat attention deficit disorder and depression in young people. Kennedy underscored his skepticism of the drugs during his Senate confirmation hearing, falsely linking SSRIs to school shootings and alleging it can be more addictive than heroin, a drug Kennedy has admitted to using in the past. Kennedy told his staff in a closed-door meeting last week of his plans to target the drugs. The commission will have 100 days to produce a report on the topic. Childhood psychiatrists insist the medications are non-addictive and proven to be safe to take. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.